The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him, and he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And then he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds, well, they fell on rocky ground, where they didn't have much soil. And they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. And other seeds fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them out. But still, other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." Later on, Jesus explained the parable to the disciples in this way. "Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. That is what is sown on the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, well, this is one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble and persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and another 30. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Well, I absolutely love today's parable. It's one of my favorites, not my favorite, but one of them. And, there's a lot of different parables to actually love because Jesus does a lot of teaching using parables. In fact, over 1/3 of Jesus' teachings are in parable form. 1/3. And so, parables, if you don't know what they are or how this kind of works in the Gospels, well, parables take an idea that people might resist, and it puts it in the context of a commonplace experience to better open people's mind to understanding something about God and about the world in a new way. And today's parable is using what was then in Jesus' time a very typical method of sowing seed, which is called broadcast sowing. So it's basically taking a bunch of seed, throwing it out there, and seeing what lands and what takes root. And Jesus is using this image to teach us a lesson about God and maybe perhaps even a little bit about ourselves. Okay, so before I get too far into it, if you're here in person, you probably already saw it in your bulletin, right? Nice little insert. I saw a few people walk out the door immediately after seeing it because they hate teaching sermons. Some of you love it. For those of you online, if you haven't found it yet, you can use the link in the QR code on your screen, and we've got a button that takes you over to that insert there. So regardless of how you feel about a teaching sermon, luckily for you, this is only one sermon, and next week is completely different. But go ahead and bring out this handout, and you'll see at the top of the first page, I've got the whole gospel reading printed there with verse numbers for you. And then at the bottom, I've got some questions and a little chart here for us to explore together so that we can unpack this parable and have it apply to our life some kind of way. So that it's not just like, well, Jesus told a great story, that's great. When does the French toast come, you know? We're going to go ahead and see what we can hang on to that can feed us through the rest of the week. All right, so the first question that I was kind of trying to figure out as we're digging into the sermon there, or to the parable there. First question, according to Jesus, what is the seed in the parable? I already gave you that answer to kind of show you what we're working with here. This is going to be one of those like interactive sermons. I know, not only teaching, but interactive. So, verse 19, right? Very quickly, we jump into that. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom, that is what the seed is. It is the word of the kingdom. So now, what in the world does Jesus mean by the word of the kingdom? Not rhetorical, so if you've got ideas, shout them out. When you hear the word, and you've been through a WPLC basics class, what are the key things about word when we think about it from a Lutheran context? What does it stand for? It stands for a bunch of different things. Oh, I wanted to take an easy way out today, Paloma, and not have to preach a whole sermon and get everyone else working. Everyone else is on summer break, too.
The Bible?
The Bible! Woo! There's one way that we can think about it. You've heard that before, right? Who's heard of the Bible? Let's see who's awake. Oh, wow, only half. Let me introduce you to this really cool book. The Bible. It has two parts. And nevertheless, a lot of books. Okay, so the Bible. So oftentimes when we hear the word in church, right? We often think about the Bible. Maybe we think about preaching, right? Preaching the word of God, right? We can think about the Bible thumpers, the Baptists. They're going to preach for 45 minutes today, and you only have to sit here for 15. You are winning, right? So here we go. We've got word, we've got Bible, we've got preaching. But so too, we need to remember that in the Bible, in the Gospels, sometimes we use the word, right? Word to mean Jesus. So the word, you see, can be expansive. It can include experiences and people aligned with God's kingdom and God's reign. Now remember, here we are in Matthew. We're about halfway through or so in this story. And up to this point in Matthew's gospel, Jesus has announced that God's reign turns everything upside down. It's a complete inversion of what the world does and how the world acts. You see, it is transforming others to love. And Jesus has already gone to confront evil directly and explicitly. Jesus has gone on to create a worldwide family, a family that isn't divided by tribe or by nation or by race or even by religion. And this transformation that Jesus brought about, well, this was a transformation through healing and love and liberation. You see, up to this point so far, Jesus has been clear that what this whole thing that he's teaching and preaching about, well, it's about serving. It's about forgiveness. It's about finding wealth, not in money, but finding wealth in community. And after he did all of this teaching, all of this preaching, saying a few parables, well, he sent the disciples out. And that's where today's reading steps in. The disciples are coming back, and they're feeling a little drained. Jesus, people are not listening. They're not responding to the word. You said this was going to be easier. And Jesus is like, well, let me tell you a story. You see, I'm going to tell you this story about the seeds. And what Jesus is reminding them is that not everyone wants to confront evil or recognize the value of all people. And even when they do, even when people think that they want to do these things, well, you see, people then often want to push back on living and aligning their thoughts with their actions, putting into practice their values. Okay, so anyway, sidetracked here. Question 2. The word of the kingdom mean? Well, it means anything that is aligned with God's vision for the world. Anything that is aligned for God's vision of the world. So yes, can it be the Bible? Sure thing. Can it be through preaching? It can be. Can it be through other people's actions? Sure can be. Okay, but let's dig it. Does that make sense? A little bit. Got about 10% there. I'm slowly declining. By the end, Kathy, it might just be you and me shaking our head at each other. And that is, okay. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and look at this little chart here on the bottom. I started filling things in for you already, making it simple, because we heard a lot of stuff in the parable. It's not like a really hard parable to understand. Like Jesus actually goes on to explicitly explain it, right? So sometimes he leaves these parables and we have no idea what he's trying to say. This one's a little bit easier. And so we've got kind of 4 different types of seed. On the bottom of page 1 is the first one, and then we got 2 and 3 on the other side. So the first seed, this is the one that fell on the path. And then what happened? The birds came, they ate it up, because these seeds, right, now we're in column C, what are the characteristics of the soil? Well, it was hard soil, right? The seeds didn't get implanted in the soil, and therefore the birds can come along and eat it all up, just like how I sow grass seed, right? I throw it down because I'm lazy, and then the birds usually come and eat it up, and I wonder why I don't have grass. That's exactly what goes on. And so here then, if we take a step back and we say we've got this sower, we got these seeds, we got these birds, if we imagine that God, or even other people who God is working through are the sowers, and that we, or you, not us collectively, this is individually now, so I or you, we are the soil. We as I and you, it's going to get confusing when I get to column E. So it's you, or I, singular. What might this look like? And so Jesus is very clear as he's explaining, this is misunderstanding God's vision for the world. Misunderstanding God's vision for the world and what it looks like because of a hardness of heart to God's vision. And therefore, we're not joining in God's vision. Does that kind of make sense? So this hardness of heart that we might have, it's a misunderstanding of God's vision. Maybe we're too, a lot of times, I'm losing people, so I'm just going to keep going off on little stories. Come back to me, come back to me, come back to me. And then we're going to speed through this, because I'm getting glazing over today. And that's okay. It's summer, right? A lot of times when we have Bible study, the way that we look at the text is often already informed by what we believe. We don't come with open minds and look at the scriptures and say, what can I get out of it? But instead, we bring our own lenses, our own backgrounds, what we've taught, and then we try to force it into the scripture. That's this type of seed right here, right? This is misunderstanding because we are not open to it. And so with that, then we also can look at this a little bit differently. We can look at it as God or another is the sower, and then maybe if we were to imagine us collectively, WPLC, Wicker Park Lutheran Church, we are the soil. What might this look like? And did you see that there's an empty blank there? This is where we get to work together. What might that look like? Where are those moments where we maybe as a community or collectively are kind of misunderstanding, we're not open? Luckily for you, I've got an answer, so I'll share mine. Everyone just wants to hear my thoughts today, Jan, I think. Is that what it is? Yeah? She keeps giggling back there. She's like, oh, poor Pastor Jason. This is why I usually try to take more vacation during the summer. Well, let's imagine this. Let's think about this, right? So since God's vision is for us to treat all people as family, right? We talked about that before. When WPLC doesn't take seriously other people's experiences, this is like that seed that falls on the ground and is taken away. So, for example, when we devalue the experiences of people of color with the police, or women's experiences with lower wages than their male counterparts, or the experiences of trans people, or immigrants, or refugees, or the elderly, or those suffering the most impact as a regard of climate change, and other marginalized groups, well, that is where the seed is sown. We are hearing through other people. God is speaking out that there is something not right with the world as these people are telling it to us, but we are choosing not to listen. We are choosing to misunderstand based on our preconceived notions of what's going on. Does that make sense? All right, we're getting to 15%. I'm feeling good, Kathy. You feeling good? So the next seed, right? We got this rocky ground, we got these thorns, and it quickly sprung up, right? And then there wasn't a lot of roots, so then it died. And then this is the time, these are the moments you or I, where we get really excited. We're really excited or passionate about God's vision. Isn't it great that we can welcome all people? Isn't it great that all people are included? And then ultimately, well, the commitment and the passion, well, it fades. Or it ends. Maybe it's due to burnout, or maybe it's due to challenge, or maybe it's just due to lack of depth of understanding of what God's vision is in the world. That's the seed. That's the seed that falls on the ground, among the rocks. And maybe for us as a congregation, an equivalent to that might be, well, maybe we are saying that we are committed to welcoming LGBTQIA plus individuals, or we say that we are welcoming to immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers, and we say that we actually want to confront racism, but then it becomes a passive statement rather than an active engagement. We're excited about it. Let's do the anti-racism thing. Then does anybody go to training? Does anybody think more deeply about it? No. Well, that's the word. That's God's message, all people as one family, and it falls on the rocky ground. How about those thorns? This is a fun one, the thorns, right? So, it's softer soil, right? The seeds get in, they're starting to try to grow, and then they get choked out by the thorns. They don't have the space. They don't have the nutrition for the seeds to grow. And those times maybe in our lives where we're open to God's vision, we find excitement in it, we can sustain it, but then we choose to spend our time and our resources maybe on less important things. And to get back to the kind of same thread that we've been following for what it may look like for us as a congregation, well, we say that love and transformation are our values. We're excited about them. We're really excited about them. And the reality is we can sustain them. But then, October comes and we got the pets running around and we start talking about the giving campaign. And then we decide, financially supporting the ministry to have a more robust children's ministry or to better support adults. Well, we don't need to do that. I'd rather go on a trip. I'd rather go to a concert. I'd rather do that big fancy thing in my house that really is maybe not necessary. Or maybe it's not even about money. Maybe it's about time. Maybe it's the choking out of our time that we'd rather go on hikes or go to the beach or travel instead of giving thanks for what we've been given to serve and give back. And that's not to say that all those things are bad. It's a balance, right? It's a balancing act of all of those things. And so if you let that seed get choked out by all the other things, well then the seed will die. That's the thorns. This is all kind of depressing now, right? But that's where the good soil comes in. And we saw there's abundant growth, it's more seeds being produced, there's soft, deep, spacious, and nutritious soil. Those are the moments where I or you, we are open and committed and making space for God's vision. And ultimately, because of that, we live in God's abundance and imagine and really show others through our inspiration that they can do the same. And so I'm wondering what that might look like in our context. This is like the good news kind of stuff, right? This is the fun stuff. So what might that look like in our context? What are those good soil moments in Wicker Park Lutheran Church? Oh, visitors, I'm so sorry. Ooh, that's a good one. Working towards ADA accessibility. So here we are, if we're saying that all people are God's family, right? And now, here's the thing. People who are here well before my time, we've been talking about this for decades and decades and decades and decades and decades, right? And then there becomes that moment where seed has been put in the soil. It's been there for so long. It's starting to grow. It's germinating. And now there's space and there's possibility. And it's starting to bud. And what does that look like to turn into abundance of welcoming all people? Because remember what we said about these seeds. We said, the word of the kingdom is the seed. And the word is this family that is gathering all people together without exception, no divisions based on ability or access to a second, almost a second story here, based on how you have to get up the stairs. And can we imagine the abundance of life that might come from that? So yeah, that seed is growing. Can we think of maybe one more? Volunteering, say more. So as everyone, I'm kind of having trouble hearing, but as everyone kind of comes together in volunteering, more and more people are engaged and we're growing. And I have to say that one of the things that you might remember for our goals this year is that we said we wanted to really emphasize volunteering more. More and more as the months go along, finding volunteers becomes a little bit easier, but that doesn't mean you get to step away, right? Because this is where we put our serving in, and we each put a little part in, and that helps it grow and bloom. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, this time that we spend together, liturgy is sometimes translated as the work of the people. Could I do it? And I couldn't. Could I do a service all by myself? I sure could. So it's not about the fact that a service can't be done with volunteers, but it's about that abundance, that growth, that connection, that participation, because this is our thing together. And that's what kind of leads us into question 4. And this is maybe a little bit of a reflection question for you, is kind of thinking about God's vision for the world. Well, what type of soil do you feel like today? And notice that I said today. I didn't say what type of soil are you. I'm not typecasting you, because I think the reality is that all of us in our lives, we are these different types of soil at different points in our lives. Sometimes we feel a little bit hardened to God's love or to different ways of seeing God's expansive nature because of misunderstanding or those lenses we already bring to Scripture. Sometimes we're excited, but our passion fades. Other times we miss the important priorities in life because life seems to be choking out our focus. But then at times we are that good soil. We're growing, we're connecting. And so I think when we think about this story, and I heard this whole story growing up all the time of, well, you need to be the good soil, right? You don't want to be like those bad people, the other soils. I think the reality is, if we're truthful about it, we are all these different types of soil at different parts in our life. And frankly, when we think about it that way, for me at least, if I see myself in all these different types of soils, well then not only might I give others a little bit of grace when they're in the rocky phase and I'm in the good soil phase, and they're in the thorny phase and I'm in the good soil. Then when I get to the point where I'm in the thorny phase, maybe I can have a little grace with myself. A little grace to know that that is a part of the journey. Because you see, and this moves us into question 5, If we truly imagine in this story, and that's the fun thing about parables, is you can go at it all different ways. Is God the sower? Maybe. Are you the sower? Maybe. Is Meadow maybe the sower? Is Vicar maybe the sower? Sure, maybe. We can enter it in different ways. But if we imagine that God is the sower, if God is the sower, then what we see is that we kind of have a reckless God. A God who doesn't just say, if you are the good soil, I will give you the seeds. But we have a God that is extravagantly throwing seed, is broadcasting it in places that God already knows are thorny and rocky and path-like stomped down. But yet God still sows that seed into all those different soil types. And isn't that such good news? Good news that in the times when you're in that rocky place, or you're in that thorny place, or you're in that flattened place, that God is still giving you love and justice and peace and grace and understanding just as much and in just the same quantity as when God is broadcasting that seed on the good soil. I mean, if that is not good gospel news today to hear, I don't know what is. We have a reckless God, a God who doesn't follow the way of the world. The way of the world would say, we need to find the best soil and we need to plant one seed at a time, side by side, the correct distance apart. But our God is like, to the wind with it. I'm going to sow love and grace and justice no matter what kind of ground feels like. Does that make sense? I'm almost done. I know, I go longer than Vicar. It's just, when you see my name in the bulletin, you just got to buckle in. I preach a little longer. I try so hard, Rick, to get it down, but I just really can't. I'm going to skip this part to make it easier for you all, and we're going to go to the end. This last question. As Christians, we are called to emulate God's or Christ's action. What might we be encouraged to do on this parable? And if we have a God who's extravagantly throwing seeds in the wind, throwing love, throwing justice, throwing peace, throwing acceptance, perhaps that's something we too could do. Perhaps on those days when we're feeling like good soil, and maybe even when we're feeling a little rocky or a little thorny or a little patted down, maybe those are the days where we can imagine throwing love around, throwing grace around, throwing understanding around, throwing community around, throwing togetherness around. You see, God is the great sower. God is throwing seeds of love and grace and acceptance extravagantly. So I pray that we too, like God, might go into the world and sow this transformation in every place, knowing that our work isn't in vain, but that God works through the seed that is sown to bring about abundant life of grace and hope and love. Let it be so. Amen.